Okay, good afternoon, everyone. It's Rabbi Akiva Males, and I hope that you're well. Today is Wednesday. It is the 7th of June, and we are getting ready for Parshas Beha'alosecha. I want to share with you several ideas on the Parsha that I think will be eye-opening and will make the Parsha a bit more meaningful for us this week. Now, Beha'alosecha is an action-packed Parsha. There's a lot of very different incidents that take place in this parsha, so we're going to have to be choosy because we obviously don't have time for an exhaustive study of Parshas Beha'alosecha. But here we go. Right at the beginning of the parsha, we're taught about the menorah and what Aaron's responsibilities are in terms of maintaining the menorah and lighting it each day in the Mishkan. So it says, "Vaydaber Hashem al Moshe lemor." God speaks to Moshe saying, "Daber al Aaron, I want you to speak to Aaron. Emarte love and say to him, Beha'alosecha haneros." When you light, Beha'alosecha means when you light up, when you raise up the flames on the lamps. Amul pnei menorah, and there, this is in the front of the menorah. Yeiru shivas haneros. So it sounds like what it means is, again, the pasuk here, you see how it's translated. The 7 lamps shall cast their light towards the face of the menorah. We'll see what that means now. So Gimel 3. Vayas Cain Aaron el mul pnei menorah. Aaron did exactly like what he was told, and he lit the lamps towards the face of the menorah. Hello, Nerosa, Kasher Tiva Hashem es Moshe. He did exactly what Hashem had instructed Moshe. The Zemasa menorah now reminds us what was the menorah made of. Miksha Zahav ad Yerecha. It was hammered out of gold from its base, ad Pircha, until the flowers. Mikshahi, it was all hammered out. Moshe, the same appearance or the form that Hashem had showed to Moshe, menorah. That's how he made the menorah. Okay, so he's given these instructions, how he's supposed to light them, and how they're supposed to, so to say, cast their glow towards the middle one, and also Aaron's supposed to stand in front of it when he lights it, not from behind. Okay, you'll notice that the word menorah shows up 4 times, and I've bolded it 4 times that it shows up in these 4 psukim. There's one in Pasuk Beis, there's one in Pasuk Gimel, and it's 2 times in Pasuk Dalet. Now, you'll notice how it's spelled, and you'll see a difference between the first 2 and the last 2. The first 2 are maleh, meaning it's full. There's a vav. Look how it's spelled, menorah with a vav. And the second 2 are chaser. They do not have that vav. It's the same pronunciation because you don't need the vav to have that sound. That you don't need the vav for that. You could just have that dot on top and it'll be pronounced the same way. But isn't that interesting that the first 2 are maleh and the second 2 are chaser? I never noticed that before, but we're going to see a source that did notice, brought this to our attention. This was Rabbi Chaim Kanievsky, who just passed away a little over a year ago. Purim was his yortzeit. So in his sefer on Chumash called Time Dekra, he notices this. And again, I don't know, he seemingly does this very often. He takes note of the words in the Torah which are chaser, which ones are maleh, which ones are missing a letter, which ones have the letter. Again, they're pronounced the same way. And he oftentimes will do this and say, well, what's the significance of this? Why did Hashem intend for it to be this way? Look what he does here. So this is on Parshas Beha'alosecha in his sefer. So we're on the right column. Beha'alosecha, yesh beparsha zu. In this segment, meaning these 4 psukim, that abbreviation is Daled Pavim, 4 times menorah. The word menorah shows up 4 times. Beis malayin, 2 are full. Those are the second 2. It has the vav. Ubeis cheserin, and 2 of them are lacking. They don't have the vav. Again, it doesn't affect the pronunciation, but the way it's spelled, 2 of them have the vav and 2 do not. So what's behind that? So here's his suggestion. V'yesh lomar. Here's what I'd posit. Menorah shasa Moshe, the menorah that Moshe assembled, Haisa kayemes bebayis rishon. It still existed in the time of the first Beis Hamikdash. Mashakasa b'menachos. The Gemara clearly says it's a menachos. So the menorah that Moshe made lasted all the years until Bnei Israel went into Israel. And then all those years of Mishkan Shiloh, first there were several years before Mishkan Shiloh was set up. So it's close to 400 years. I think it was 396 years or 369 years. That's the one that the Mishkan Shiloh stood for. And then the first Beis Hamikdash was over 400 years. So during that entire time period, close to 1,000 years, the menorah that Moshe Rabbeinu made it stood. And then he quotes the Gemara in Menachos Samach Ches Samach Beis. V'shas Churban, when the first Beis Hamikdash was destroyed by the Bavlim, by the Babylonians, Natlu Kastim, the Chaldeans, that's really the Bavlim, the same people, they took it leBavel, to Bavel, Mefurish Besof Yirmiyahu, and you'll see that clearly at the end of Yirmiyahu. Mistama, and it's logical to say Hechziru Kishebanu Bayis Sheni, that when Ezra and Nehemiah came back from Bavel and they rebuilt the second Beis Hamikdash, there are sources that say they brought back with them those plundered items from the Beis Hamikdash, from the first Beis Hamikdash that had gone into exile, they brought back with them. So what he's positing is the first menorah that Moshe Rabbeinu built, it had an incredible life. It lasted all the years of the Mishkan, and then Mishkan Shiloh, and then it lasted the full Beis Hamikdash, and then it was even brought to the second Beis Hamikdash. K'mavur be'Ezra, you see this in Ezra, Shechziru es kol klei Beis Hamikdash sheridu l'Bavel. So it says in Ezra that when Ezra and Nehemiah come back with the Jews from Babylonia, they brought with them the plundered goods from Bayis Rishon, from the temple. And that menorah that Moshe Rabbeinu assembled, that he built, that was in service until the days of the Yevanim, the Syrian Greeks of the Hanukkah story. She'az Kenira Tumu. That's where it seems that the Syrian Greeks, they had defiled it. They made it ritually impure. Ishtam Shubo, because they used it for their Avodah Zarah purposes. The Nifso Me'akrava, and it became invalidated to be used in the service in the Beis Hamikdash. Mashakasav Avodah Zarah and Beis Hamikdash Gamin Mizbeach. The same thing happened to the Mizbeach, that the Mizbeach was invalidated for use because it had been used for idol worship. They had to make a new Mizbeach. So too, the menorah was defiled by the Syrian Greeks. Therefore, Beis Chashmonai, when the Chashmonaim, when they had their revolt against the Syrian Greeks in the Hanukkah story, and they were victorious, Asu Menorah Chadasha, they had to make a brand new menorah when they were going to light the menorah. Mashakasav and Menachos, Chavchasam Beis, you see the Gemara talks about this. Shebeis Chashmonai Asu Menorah Mishipudim Shamateches. The initial menorah that the Chashmonaim built was made out of rods, metal rods. Basically, it was almost their weapons, like their spears that they had from the war. They were able to use those to create a new menorah. Shekasher b'diavad, even though it's not gold, it's not optimal, but nonetheless, until you get something better, that's what they initially used, and that was good b'diavad. Heshiru, when they became more wealthy, asom shel kesef, they made a third menorah. So far we see two. The first one was built by Moshe. It lasted all the years of the Mishkan, the first Beis Hamikdash, and then they brought it back for the second Beis Hamikdash. Then what happens? By the Hanukkah story, they can't use it, so they built a second menorah, and that one is made out of steel rods. And then Shiru, when they became more wealthy, Asom Shel Kesef, they made a third menorah out of silver. Because again, B'di Eved, that's not optimal. It's supposed to be out of gold, but that's the best they could do. That's what they could afford. Chazru v'shiru, and then when they became even more wealthy, and towards the end of the second Beis Hamikdash, Asom Shel Zav, the Gemara says they made a fourth menorah out of gold. V'zeh nishar out of korban bayisheni, and it was that last menorah that was built out of gold. That's the one that was in use until the second Beis Hamikdash was destroyed. So he says, look at this brief history lesson. How many menorahs were in service? 4. You had the one that Moshe made, and it lasted from all the Mishkans till the first Beis Hamikdash, and then it was brought back for the second. That lasts all the way till Hanukkah. Then what happens is they need to create a new one because the menorah had been defiled for idol worship. So they make one out of steel rods, their weapons. Then when they become more wealthy, they make a third menorah out of silver, and then finally a fourth one out of gold. So there were 4 menorahs that were in service. So here's what Reb Chaim Kanievsky says. Notice what happened. It said menorah 4 times. Menorah. It said it 4 times. 2 of them were chaser and 2 of them were male. So he says, here's how we could explain it. He says as follows. Nimsa comes out, she Yisrael asu daled menoros. It came out that over the course of time, between when the Mishkan was inaugurated until the second Beis Hamikdash was destroyed, there were 4 menorahs that were in service. Shnayim shal zahav kedin. 2 of them were made of gold by the letter of the law, what they should have been. That's menorah number 1 and menorah number 4. Vishnayim shekesherin rak b'diavad. And there were two others, number 2 and number 3, which were not made of gold. The first was made of steel rods from the weapons of the Chashmonaim, and the third one was made of silver. So again, even though that's not optimal, they're still kosher. The Yesh Lomar, so that's what the hint is in our parsha. The Kenegdan Ksiv, it was in light of those 4 menorahs that were going to be destined to serve in the Mishkans and then the Beis HaMikdash. That's why the Torah here writes 4 times the word menorah. And it doesn't just say it 4 times, but it hints to this because it says Ksiv Daled Pamim menorah. It says the word menorah 4 times. Shnayim Malayim, twice it's Malay. It's absolute. It has the vav, meaning it's saying that there, in Jewish history, through the time of the second Beis HaMikdash, not at the time of Mashiach, that's a later period, but through the time of the second Beis HaMikdash, there will be 4 menorahs. 2 of them will be absolutely complete. They will be malay, meaning they're going to meet all the criteria that the Torah said. They're going to be made of gold. And shnayim cheserin, and the other 2 will still be kosher, but there's something chaser. Chaser means lacking. Either the one that the Chashmonaim first built out of the steel, out of the metal rods, their weapons, or the next one when they upgraded it to silver. They were kosher, but they were lacking. They were chaser. So that's what Reb Chaim says. That's why it says menorah 4 times. That's why 2 of them are malay, 2 of them are chaser. That's his theory. The Torah here is giving us a hint of what's to come. It's fascinating. It fits like a glove, and it's fascinating, but it's also one of those items that you can only see in hindsight. If someone would have seen that until the time of the second Beis HaMikdash, until the Hanukkah story, they would have had no idea. They would have said, this is one of the mysteries of the universe, that God decided the word menorah should be there 4 times, 2 malay, 2 chaser. Who knows? Rav Chaim is saying, in hindsight, we can make sense of this. And this is so true of so many other areas of life too, is that we've pointed this out in the past, that the Chassam Sofer used to say that in Parshas Kisisa, when Moshe Rabbeinu begs Hashem to forgive Bnei Yisrael after the Chet HaEgel, the sin of the golden calf, Hashem tells him, Barisa Acharai, you can see my back, Upanai Lo Yireh, you can't see my face. And the Chassam Sofer used to darshan that, to say, what that means is, as mortals, we can't know, we can't understand God's ways. The best we could do is hindsight. Sometimes God will grant us the wisdom, the understanding to figure out his plan in hindsight. But we can't see it moving forward. We can't know what the future holds. We're not Nevi'im, but sometimes he gives us the gift of, in hindsight, being able to make sense of his plan. And this is one of those instances here. In hindsight, Rav Chaim is saying, okay, now we can have a good theory. Why it said menorah 4 times, why 2 malay, 2 chaser. But until it's in the rear view mirror, no one would have had a clue, unless you were a Navi. No one would have had a clue. Why is it that it says it 4 times? Why are it 2 times is it written malay? Why is it that 2 times it's written chaser? Now that it's all in hindsight, he says, I've got a theory that can make sense of all that. All right, let's move on to a second Dvar Torah on the Parsha. A little bit later in the Parsha, we read about the Asaf Suf. The Asaf Suf were the multitude, the Erev Rab, that mixed multitude that had joined Bnei Israel when we were leaving Egypt. And they made a lot of trouble in the wilderness. They complained. So here's one of their complaints. They're complaining about the man. So the pasuk says, "V'asaf suf asher b'kirbo." There was mixed multitudes that were amidst the Jewish people. Hisavu taiva. They had this strong desire and cravings. V'yoshuvu v'yibchu. And they all sat down and they started to cry. The Gam Bnei Yisrael, they got the other Jews, in other words, the mixed multitude started it, but then they got Bnei Yisrael to join in and feeling all cranky, and they all start crying. Yomru, and they say, Mi achilenu basar. Oh, if only we had meat, we could be fed meat. Zacharnu es hadaga asher nochal b'mitzrayim chinam. We remember all the wonderful fish that we were able to eat in Egypt at no cost. As a kishuim, we had cucumbers. Avatichim, we had watermelons. As a chatzir, we had leeks. As a betzalim, we had onions, and shumim, and we had garlic. And now our bodies were all dried out. Ain't cold. We don't have anything to eat out here. Built the Elaman. All we've got is this mud, and that's all we've got to look at. But we don't have any of those good treats and delicacies. So it's a very hard pasuk to understand. But what was going on? First of all, they had so many animals. If they really were lacking for meat, why didn't they just shech some of their animals? So a lot of commentators deal with that. Others say, what does it mean, chinam? They were getting it for free. The Egyptians were enslaving them. Do you really think they were handing out free meat? So some of the Mefarshim say what that means. Of course, the Gemara chinam for no cost meant chinam mina mitzvos, is that we didn't have any obligations of observing mitzvos. Now they were complaining that, okay, we've got this man, but it's dependent on us. We're in this covenant with Hashem that we've got.
Garlic, onions, and leeks are not delicacies.
Yeah, we're going to get there in a second. So one way that's understood is that again, that they were saying that it was chinam, it was free. They didn't have any responsibilities and mitzvos. Another question that comes up is, what are they saying are delicacies here? I understand these cucumbers, okay, that'll great fiber and it'll be great for a salad and some greens. Avatiach, a watermelon on a hot day in the desert. Oh, wow, is that refreshing? What's with the garlic and onions? What are they complaining about? So some of the commentaries point out that again, those are necessary ingredients in order to give flavor, to give spice to the foods that we're creating. It might not be a delicacy, but it's such a vital component if we want to give flavor to the items that we're cooking, that we're preparing. And the Mefarshim say, quoting the Gemara, why did Hashem not provide those? It says because those could be harmful for a nursing mother if she's going to have these sharp foods like onions, leeks, garlic, onions, and stuff. That could be harmful, so they didn't have that. That's what some of the commentaries point out. But the $1 million question here is, what did the Jews have? It says in Pasuk Vav, they weren't going around starving. Atonaf shenu yevesha. Our souls, our bodies are all dried out. All we've got in front of our eyes is this man. They had man. Man was this heavenly gift, and according to many of our commentators, what was man able to taste like? Anything. So if they had man, and man can taste like anything, what's their complaint? Okay, so we don't have real onions and garlics and leeks. So just think about what you want, that French onion soup, whatever it is, and you can have your man taste like whatever you want. So many of our commentators are bothered by this, just trying to understand what's the complaint. I want to share with you a very interesting approach here from the Tosefes Bracha. The Tosefes Bracha, again, this is Rav Baruch Halevi Epstein. This is the author of the Torah Tamima. This is what he wrote later in life. And we've quoted him many times. He's got some wonderful explanations. Let's look what he does with this. We're all dried out. We're miserable. We don't have anything except for this man in front of our faces. What's this expression? We're miserable. All we have is this man in front of our eyes. What does that mean? They should have just said, we're miserable. We don't have anything good. All we have is this man. What's that expression in front of our eyes? So he says, he says, maybe we could explain this based on the Gemara in Yuma. The Gemara says, is that there was an incredible miracle about the man, that it could taste like whatever it was that Jews wanted to eat. If that's the case, everyone asks this question. If that's the case, Amai Sonu, what are they complaining about in Kol? That we don't have this stuff. They could attain whatever they want. You want to have pizza? It tastes like pizza. You want to have salmon? It tastes like salmon. What are they complaining about? That we don't have onions and leeks. The man could taste like anything. So he says, there's another Gemara in Yoma that says what, Mavor? It says, it explains as follows. A good degree of the pleasure that we get from eating, it is greatly added to if we can see what we're eating. The visual experience of our eating adds so much to the pleasure, our dining pleasure. Meaning, if we're in a dark room, we might have the best tasting meal in the world, but it's not all about taste. The vision plays a very big role in how we enjoy what it is that we're eating. And if we can't see it, it's not that same pleasurable dining experience. That's what the Gemara in Yoma tells us. And that's one of the reasons why we want to have lights in the house on Shabbos, for Shalom Bayis. Yeah, it's so we don't trip over things and that we can see the table. But it's also, if we have a mitzvah of Oneg Shabbos, we're supposed to enjoy Shabbos. We can't really enjoy that which we can't see, that which we can't experience with sight, we can't fully enjoy. So this is sight plays a very big role in terms of our overall enjoyment, but even at our meals, it's not just about taste. That's what the Gemara in Yoma tells us. If we can't see what we're eating with our own eyes, there's something lacking. It's not complete if we can't visually appreciate what it is that we're eating. How many times have you heard people say that about compliment the chef? Oh, it's so visually appealing. Where's that coming from? Isn't it just about taste? No, taste plays a huge part, but there's another essential part. It's got to be visually appealing. Last paragraph. Therefore, he says, now we can wrap it all up. He says, yes, man could taste like whatever anyone wants it. They could have it taste like pizza. It could taste like macaroni and cheese. It could taste like salad that's filled with onions and leeks. It could taste like garlic. Whatever it is, it could taste that way. They would only experience that with their taste buds. But they didn't visually see it. What did it look like? It looked like mashed potatoes, whatever man looked like. This white, how the Torah describes it, white seeds. It was probably beautiful to look at, but it didn't look like the food it was tasting like. Therefore, even if it tasted like pizza, even if it tasted like macaroni and cheese, okay, on the taste buds, it's that way. But since I can't see it, I don't fully enjoy it. You know what that's like? You buy one of these artificially flavored potato chips that says, okay, this tastes like, pick whatever it is. It's ridiculous. Sometimes you'll see these, the potato chips, they'll say, okay, this is buffalo wing flavor. I eat that. I'm not tasting buffalo wings. I'm tasting potato chips that are spicy. Whatever it is, if you're not seeing that product, okay, that's novel. You got this taste there, but if you're not seeing it, it's not the same thing. This is what they were complaining. We don't have the full experience of those foods which are nafshenu chashka, that our souls, that our bodies really desire. Because when we look down, all we see are mashed potatoes. All we see is man. Let's say you had this magical way to make your mashed potatoes taste like whatever you want them to. That's great, but since they look like mashed potatoes, I'm not going to say I'm eating steak. I'm not going to say I'm eating salmon. I'm not going to say I'm eating salad. It might taste that way, but that's not the real deal. So he's saying that's what the pasuk's getting at. It's not what we want to eat. If we don't have that visual experience, we don't have it. So now look back at the pasuk. Now our souls, our bodies are all dried out. All our eyes see is the man. Yes, we can get it to taste like whatever we want it to taste like, but visually nothing changed. And since visually it hasn't changed, we're not having that culinary experience that we really desire. So he says that's what the kvetching was about. He says that's his idea. Now, again, it's still very, very hard to understand. You have people who are existing on miracles. They're living in a wilderness where there is no food and they've got all their nutrients provided to them and it could taste like whatever they want. What are you kvetching about? Imagine this. Imagine someone is just living on astronauts. You hear about this. They have all these high protein, high calorie foods that they have to eat. Yeah, they get all the nutrients they need. They get all the calories they need, but it's not a good dining experience. It's all this freeze-dried stuff. I'm sure Mun was better than that, but nonetheless, when an astronaut gets back, all his nutritional needs may have been met, but he cannot wait to sit down and have a good steak and potato dinner. There's no way that it's going to match up with that. So in a certain sense, that's what's going on here. That's how Rav Baruch Halevi Epstein wants to understand this. What were they complaining about? They had all the mod, they had all the taste. Yeah, but that's like that astronaut that he's got all this. And again, I'm sure it was better than the NASA food, but nonetheless, there was something missing, and that's what got them kvetching. That's how he learns this, and that gives us some insight to explaining this pasuk. Why did they throw in that line? Why does the Torah throw in that line, Eleinenu? That we can't visually, it sounds like there's something lacking in the vision, and now that's how he explains it. Beautiful, but I want to set it up as a contrast, because look at this, on page 3, this is Torah Ladas. Torah Ladas is Rabbi Matis Blum. We quote him all the time. Rabbi Matis Blum unfortunately passed away during the first wave of COVID. He lived in Queens, New York. He was a great Talmid Chacham, prolific author, and a teacher of Torah. So his family, even though he's not able to write new Torah Ladas bulletins, his family has collected his decades worth of Torah Ladas bulletins, and each week they're continuing his legacy by sharing them with with his fan base. He had a very large fan base, and I continue to get them. So look what came in this week. This is something from, again, obviously many years ago. Look at it under halachic discussions. He says, Chazal and Brachos, the Gemara Brachos tell us that Moshe established the first bracha of Birkas Hamazon when the man fell in the desert. Going Rav Yosef Engel in his Gilyonei Ashas, he's one of our achronim, he asks the following question. Since the man was not one of the 5 grains, right? It's not barley, it's not wheat, it's not, what are the other 5 grains? It's not spelt, it's not oats, it's not any of that. So he says, since it's not one of the 5 grains, how is it permissible to recite Birchas Hamazon? We don't cite Birchas. Let's say I fill myself up on rice. Okay, I make an alamichia. I don't make a Birchas Hamazon. It's not one of the 5 grains. I only make a Birchas Hamazon if I had enough food of the 5 grains. So how can the Gemara tell us that Moshe Rabbeinu created the first paragraph, that first bracha of benching? You shouldn't bench unless you had the 5 grains. And Moshe created this upon having the man. The man wasn't one of the 5 grains. It fell from heaven. That's the question that Rav Yosef Engel asks, and look at his answer. He answers that Rav Nachman, who said that Moshe established the bracha of Hazonas HaKol, that's in the Gemara in Brachos, when the man fell, follows the view expressed in Yoma. Again, Baruch HaLevi Epson was quoting the Gemara in Yoma. There's another view in Yoma that says what? That the man actually became the item that one intended it to taste like. The Gemara in Yoma says there's an opinion out there that the miracle of man was so great, not only did it taste like what it was supposed to taste like, but more than that, it actually morphed into that. If I'm thinking pizza, I look down and boom, I've got a slice of pizza. It's going to have a crunchy crust to it. If I'm thinking steak, it's going to start sizzling. My man is now going to turn into that steak. I'm going to look down and that's what's there. So there's an opinion in the Gemara that says not only was the taste affected, but the miracle was so great that it actually turned into that food. So if that's the case, he says as follows. Thus, if one wished the man to taste like bread, it actually became bread. So if it became bread, now it's according to that opinion that says Moshe Rabbeinu set up to say Birchas Hamazon. What do you mean? How could Moshe set up Birchas Hamazon on the man? It's not one of 5 grains. No, since man could become, it could taste like bread, it actually became bread according to that opinion, and therefore that's how I said it. Now, if that's the case, Rav Baruch HaLevi Epstein's piece we just saw in the last piece won't work. In other words, he can only work in the opinion that says only the taste was affected, but nothing else. Because if it became that, which I assume means visually as well, because if he's saying here that it became that means in reality it's a piece of pizza, it's one of the 5 grains, and now you bench, so that means visually they should have nothing to complain about anymore. So I think what you see from this is that, again, there's different opinions in the Gemara over there about what the miracle of man was. Did it just taste was transformed, or even its whole essence, it morphed into a different reality? If it morphed into a different reality, then you can't use that approach of the Tosefes Bracha anymore. Just very cool to know that there's this other opinion that's out there. Let's go on. Here's the last item I want to share with you today. I think this is very cool. We're going to see, I also saw this in the sheet that Rabbi Matis Bloom's family sent out this week. Very cool. If you look, I have there a date. This coming Monday, which is the 12th of June, is the 23rd of Sivan. Are we not excited about that? And now if you're like me, you're going to say, well, what's the 23rd of Sivan? Why should I be excited about the 23rd of Sivan? So I was shocked, but I can't believe this. Every year on Purim, this goes in one ear and out the other. Let's look at Megillas Esther to see what happened on the 23rd of Sivan, which is this coming Monday. So the pasuk says this is in Perek Ches. This is after Haman has been hanged. Mordechai and Esther have been given control of Haman's authority. So they're told they can't cancel the king's decree. So what do? They write up a new decree. They write up a new decree that in the coming year, on the 14th of Adar, Jews could rise up and go on preemptive strikes against all their enemies. And that's what they do. So Purim, which was supposed to be the 14th of Adar, when Jews were going to be exterminated, ends up being a day of everything turned around. It was self-defense. And that's why they finally celebrate the following day when they can relax. Okay, what day was that second letter written that gave permission to the Jews to go on those preemptive strikes? The Megillah clearly tells us this. It's kind of hidden in plain sight. It's right there. Look at this in Perek Ches. Let's look at Pasuk Tas. It says, Vayikaru Sofrei HaMelech. So Mordechai and Esther call in all the scribes and the king. Vayisai at that time, B'chodesh HaShlishi, in the third month. What's the third month? Well, if the first one is Nisan, the second one is Iyar, the third month is Sivan. Hu Chodesh Sivan. It tells us straight out. It was in the month of Sivan. B'shlosha v'esrim bo, on the 23rd. The Megillah is telling us this. It's right there. And it goes in one ear and out the other. How many of us? I guarantee we're all at Megillah Esther twice on Purim. Ask anybody who's at Megillah Esther. I would say 99.9% of the audience, if you ask them what was the date of the calendar that the new letter was written and went out, we'll get a bunch of blank stares. It just doesn't go in. I don't think I'm unique in this way. I don't think any of us register. But the pasuk clearly says it was in the third month, which is Sivan, and on the 23rd day, by Kasev Kechol Asher Tziva Mordechai Ela Yudim, the scribes wrote up everything that Mordechai, all the instructions he gave to Jews, the instructions that were given to all that these are different levels of government officials. Asher Mehodi Va'akush, Sheva Me'av Esher Medina, Sheva V'Esher Me'av Midar, and all 127 provinces, Midam Minak Sava, everyone, it was written for every state, every province, according to their language, Va'avam Kelshono, Ve'ela Yudim K'savam L'shonom, and he sent it to the Jews in their language that they would understand as well. It was on the 23rd of Sivan. So it's astonishing. This date next week is actually a very, very significant date, which begs the question, at such a significant date, why is that totally ignored? We celebrate Purim on the 14th and 15th of Adar. I get it. And in Shushan Purim, again on the 16th, I get it. Those are very significant days. Those were the doomsday dates. And then they were turned around. I totally get it. But the 23rd of Sivan, that's a big deal. That was the day when the new letters went out and the authority was able to be exercised. Mordechai and Esther have this new authority. They've got the signet ring, and that's when they exercise that authority. Why is it that the 23rd of Sivan is just in obscurity? We don't do anything about it. We don't say anything. We don't give a clap on the bima and shul and say, today's a big deal. We don't do that. Never really thought about this before. Let's see what Rabbi Bloom did. Rabbi Bloom, again, this is in the same piece that his family sent out this week. He offers a couple paragraphs on this. It was a longer piece. I only brought down a couple paragraphs. Yom Sheni, this coming week on Monday, Haba Leinu L'Tova, which should come upon us in good health. Yeah, Chaf Gimel Sivan will actually be the 23rd of Sivan. With Shtei Megillos, and there are two separate Megillos. Misupar, it is clearly told, Mashi'ira B'Yom Zeh. We have two different Megillos. I'll tell you soon what the second Megillah is. Two Megillas speak out that something very unique happened, was experienced by Bnei Yisrael on the 23rd of Sivan. Megillah Esther, the first Megillah we're going to look at is in the Megillah of Esther. That's what we just looked at. And the second is Megillah Tanis. So just to pause for a second, what is Megillah Tanis? I'm just going to get one off my shelf. I have one right here. Give me 1 second. What is Megillah Tanis? So, holding one in my hands now. Let me get back to the computer. I'm holding one in my hands now. Megillah Tanis is a small work that was written in the time of the second Beis HaMikdash. And what they did in Megillah Tanis is as follows. They recorded all of the dates that were significant dates in each month, and to figure out what were days that we should be fasting based on calamities that happen on those dates, and what are days that we should be doing something celebratory because of miracles that we had on those dates. So it'll sometimes tell you when are dates that we should not be fasting, and when are dates where we should be fasting. That's what goes on in Megillah Tanis. When the second Beis HaMikdash was destroyed, Megillah Tanis was abolished. There were too many woes and too many troubles that we experienced, and therefore Megillah Tanis was abolished after the destruction of the second Beis HaMikdash. But nonetheless, until the destruction of the second Beis HaMikdash, this was something which was studiously observed. So in Megillah Tanis, again, I didn't have a chance to look this up in my copy that I have here, but I guarantee you I will be looking this up after we're done. So, but okay, let me get back to this now. So he says Megillas Tanis. Let's continue reading with Rabbi Matis Blum. Second paragraph, Megillas Esther. Where in Megillas Esther does the 23rd of Sivan come up? Megillas Esther Mishupar. It is clearly it says, and we just read the psukim. Shebiyom zeh nechtavu igros hashnios. That's the day that the second letters were written. Asher bitlu ha'igros harishanos. That abolished the first letters, that basically nullified, because the first letters couldn't be torn up. Those were the ones that Haman had sent out that said on the 14th of Adar, you could kill all the Jews and take their money. But what did we read in Parashas? That on that day, the third month, which is Sivan, on the 23rd day, that's when the scribes assembled a second time. Or Sivan Shlosha Esrim Bo, Vekosev Kachol Asher Sivan Mordechai Elo Yudim Ach Shtar Banim, Apachos Fine, Asher Nasan Amelech La Yudim Asher B'chol Year V'Yer Li Koel V'Lamod Arav Sham. That they were all given license to stand up and go to war against their enemy, go on this defensive, preemptive strike. Okay, V'ayin. That's what we know from Megillas Esther. V'ayin Makor Chayim LeBal Sheos Tzuvas Chavos Yar. So the Chavos Yar was Rav Yair Chaim Bachrach. He was one of the major rabbinic figures in Germany, I believe in the 1500s. So Rav Yair Chaim Bachrach, in his Sefer Chavos Yair, he wrote the Chaf Gimel Sivan, that on the 23rd of Sivan, Yesh Lizkor Nes Purim. It's really appropriate for all of us on the 23rd of Sivan to pause and remember the miracle of Purim. That's when Mordechai had the scribes write up those second letters, had Teshua, that provided us with salvation. We should do something and be festive. So here it is that the Chavos Yar, Rav Yair Chaim Bachrach, he's writing this in the 1500s in Ashkenaz. Yet we've never heard of anyone following through on this. Why is that? So let's see. Next paragraph. Besof Megillas Tanis Isa. At the end of Megillas Tanis, again, I want to look this up to find it inside. At the end of Tanis, what do we find? We find as follows. One second. There it is. Bingo. I just found it. Okay. Well, I'll read it to you. I found it inside. Besof Megillas Tanis, he said, at the end of Megillas Tanis, what do we find? That something calamitous happened on the 23rd of Sivan earlier in Jewish history. Remember, the Purim story happens in between the first and second Beis Hamikdash, at the end of the 70 years of Galus Bavel. Prior to that, something bad had happened in Jewish history on the 23rd of Sivan. What is that? Besof Megillas Tanis Isa, where it's listing the times that we should be fasting because of calamities. It says, Be'esrim v'shalosh b'Sivan, on the 23rd of Sivan, Batlu habikurim, mila'alos liYerushalayim b'mei Yeravam ben Navat. Yeravam ben Navat was the first king of the 10 tribes. Remember, there was this terrible breakaway after Shlomo HaMelech died. So his son is Rechavam, and then Rechavam, people aren't happy with him as a king. Yeravam ben Navat leads this breakaway kingdom of the 10 northern tribes. It becomes Malchus Yisrael. So it's the kingdom of Yisrael and then Malchus Yehuda, the kingdom of Yehuda. So the northern kingdom is what it ends up being called, secedes. And they not only did they secede and say we're going to have our own Malchus, but they built these incredible gates, you might say almost like a Berlin Wall, to stop Jews from the northern kingdom from being Ola L'Regel, taking trips to the Beis Hamikdash, not just for the Yom Tovim, but even coming with Bikurim, with their first, the produce of the year. So it was a terrible schism that occurred. And it was on the 23rd of Sivan that ordinance went into effect, that Yeravam ben Navat posted guards along the roads and saying, no, you cannot take Bikurim to Yerushalayim anymore. You cannot pay homage to HaKadosh Baruch Hu in the Beis Hamikdash. You can't do anything that'll give authority to Malchus Yehuda. So that was when he put armed guards out there, that they were no longer allowed to bring Bikurim in the Beis Hamikdash. Ulechenu Yom Tanis. And that's why in the days of the second Beis Hamikdash, they actually observed the 23rd of Sivan as a fast day. It's actually brought down in the Torah and Shulchan Aruch. I have before we do that last paragraph, let's just go down. I hear this is a section of the Shulchan Aruch many are not familiar with. And he tells us these were days that Bnei Israel would often fast on. Some of them we're familiar with, and some of them we've never heard of. So, for example, look at Sif Beis there. It says Be'echad Nisan, on the first day of Nisan, which is Rosh Chodesh, Mesu Bnei Aaron. That's when Nadav and Avihu died. So there were people, even though it was Rosh Chodesh, they would fast that day. Sarabo on the 10th of Nisan, Mesa Miriam. That's when Miriam died. That's her yard site. In the Nistalik HaBe'er, and that's when the Jews didn't have the Be'er, that water. They started complaining, and Moshe hit the rock. Vav on the 26th of Nisan, Mes Yoshua ben Nun. That's the yard site of Yoshua. Yud Iyar on the 10th of Iyar, Mes Elia Cohen, Ushnei Banav v'Nishbar Hashem. The 10th of Iyar, that's the month after Pesach. In Iyar, the 10th of Iyar, that's when the terrible tragedy, when Mishkan Shiloh was destroyed, Eli died, and his sons died, Chafni and Pinchas, and that's when the ark gets taken captive by the Plishtim. Next one, B'Chav Chesbo on the 28th of Iyar, Mes Shmuel Hanavi. That's the yard site of Shmuel Hanavi. And then it says B'Chav Gimel Sivan. That's the date this coming Monday, on the 23rd of Sivan. Batlu Habikurim Milalos Yerushalayim. That is when Yeravam ben Nevat made this decree. He established armed guards to stop pilgrims from going to Yerushalayim, not just for Yom Tovim, but they couldn't even bring Bikurim. So he severed from the heart of all the Jews living in the northern kingdom, he severed the connection to the Beis HaMikdash. May Yeravam ben Nevat. By the way, look what happens a couple days later. The Chav Hebo on the 25th. So if Monday is the 23rd, so 2 days later, which is Wednesday, a week from today, that's Nerag, Rav Shimon ben Gamliel, and Rabbi Yishmael, and Rabbi Chananya, Skana Kohanim. Those are some of the Asara Haruge Malchus that we read about on Tisha B'Av and on Yom Kippur, the 10 martyrs. So 3 of them, their yard site is going to be next week on Wednesday. Fascinating. So again, so the 23rd of Sivan, in Megillas Esther, it's that there's an incredible miracle that happened, that God was showing us that he loves us, that Mordechai and Esther, they were able to start the turnaround, and they got the scribes to start writing. But at an earlier point in Jewish history, on the 23rd of Sivan, that was a very tragic date. That's when the schism, the break-off of Yeravam ben Nevat, really in a certain sense became complete. That's when he stopped. He put his armed guards up there to stop Jews from going to the Beis HaMikdash. By the way, you know what point in Jewish history there was a unification once again, and then that the 10 tribes allowed people to go back? There's an opinion of the Gemara that says that's one of the reasons we celebrate on Tu B'Av, the 15th day of Av. That's when they started allowing people from the northern kingdom to go to the Beis HaMikdash again. So in a sense, it was a return of unity. All right, but let's just pause. I want to read to you, before we get to that last paragraph there, I want to read to you what's in Megillas Tanis. Here it says, it's like the Shulchan Aruch, B'Esrim Mishlosha B'Sivan, on the 23rd of Sivan, Batlu HaBikurim Elalos Yerushalayim B'Mei Yeravam ben Nevat. So that's exactly what the Shulchan Aruch has there. Wow. Okay. So let's see. The last paragraph. So again, the Makor Chaim, who was Rav Chaim Yor Bachrach, he said on the 23rd of Sivan, we should be doing something to recognize the miracle and celebrating to some degree, but we don't. Why? So look at this. B'Sefer Leket Biurim Rabbi Betzalel HaKohen in Vilna. So one of the great Achronim, he was known as Betzalel HaKohen, he lived in Vilna. Kasav Levarach Chelek Ma'apamim. He wrote in one of his works, explaining a number of times in the Torah, Shnimtzes Tevas V'Hayamim B'Tanach, L'Fia Mesorah. He wants to explain, there are numerous times throughout Tanakh, you see this word V'Hayamim. So he gives you an example, 3 of them. First one, it says Hayamim Arishonim Yiplu. So he's talking about, that's when a Nazir, that a Nazir, when he completes, the time that he or she had vowed that they were going to be a Nazir for. And then it says Vayamim Yemei Bikurei Anavim. We're going to read about that next Shabbos. That's in Shalach. When the spies go into Israel, it was the time of Bikurei Anavim, when the first ripenings of the grapes was taking place. And then it says Vayamim Ha'ela Nizkarim V'Nasim. That's in Megillas Esther, there where it says that these days, meaning the 15th and 16th, those are days where we're going to celebrate Purim. 15th if we're outside of an Ir Chava, a walled city. 16th if you're Shushan, like a Ir Chava. So look what he says. V'kach bir. This is what Rabbi Betzalel HaKohen says in Vilna. Really, we should have done like what the Chavas Yar said, and there should be a Yom Tov on the 23rd of Sivan. That's when the second letters got sent out. Shetzilos b'nei Yisrael migzeres Haman, which ended up saving b'nei Yisrael. So why is it that we specifically observe the Yomim Ha'ela? Yudalad and Tesvav, the 14th and 15th of Adar, or the 16th if you're in Irchama, Nizkar V'Nasim. Why is it Dafka there? Vayomim Arishonim, but the earlier days of Chav Gimel Sivan, Shazai Rosh Gula, that's the start of the Gula, Yiplu. Why is it that we just in our Zizdarshnei, Hayamim Arishonim Yiplu, by the Nazir, he's saying those kind of fell by the wayside. Why is it that the Yamim Rishonim, meaning in the Purim story, the 23rd of Sivan, why does that Yiplu? Why did that fall by the wayside? Ben Chogin Kanoson, no one celebrates it. Ahezber, what's the reason? Bishum Vayamim Yimei Bikurei Anavim. Because look, that's the day of Bikurei Anavim. Bikurei sounds like Bikurim. That was the first, the first ripenings of the grapes. Meaning what? That's a hint. Sha'az Batlu HaBikurim, because something bigger happened on the 23rd of Sivan at an earlier point in Jewish history. That's when Yeravam ben Nevat broke. That was a tragic point of fissure in the Jewish people, when everything fell apart, and there was this terrible schism that was created there. The Milalos Yerushalayim Imei Yeravam ben Nevat, this chasm that existed. So that's when that comes in. So that's how Rav B'Tzalel Cohen answers this, is that he darshans on those words of Hayamim, is that if you want to know why is it that we celebrate Yamim Eila, the 14th, 15th, 16th, and we don't celebrate the Yamim Rishonim, why are those Yiplu? Why did those fall by the wayside? Because Hayamim may be created of him, because of what happened. It's like it's impossible, even though you might look at it as redemptive. Look what happened on the 23rd of Sivan. Incredible miracle happened. That this turnaround, that is wonderful. But how can we celebrate on a day of the 23rd of Sivan where something so dark and ugly happened in Jewish history earlier? That was when Yeravam ben Nevat posted his guards to stop us from being Ola L'Regel, even though it's wonderful that something eclipsed that, and it's clearly written in Tanakh that something great happened, but at the same token, it holds us back from really celebrating that day, when we always know that's a day that's recorded, a day will live in infamy, as a day of when Yeravam ben Nevat had that final breakaway of the 10 tribes. I thought that's fascinating. And that's next week. So it's something to think about. So we'll close here. Just to remember, we looked at 3 very interesting ideas today. The first interesting idea was Rav Chaim Kanievsky. It says menorah 4 times in the Parsha, and to our Malay, to our Chaser. What's he getting at? He tells us the reason, and that also reminds us that sometimes we'll see things hindsight, but we can't know in advance if we're not a Navi. The next we saw was the Tosefes Bracha, that he was saying, what are they kvetching about? Man could taste like anything. Yeah, but the appearance was still like mashed potatoes. So they were complaining because they didn't have that culinary experience of not having the visual pleasure. And then we saw, but that's not true according to all opinions. There is an opinion out there that Rav Yosef Engel quoted saying that man, not only did the taste change, but it actually morphed into that object. So according to that, you can't answer. So that would mean that the Makor Baruch, who provided us that answer, was only working in the opinion that the item didn't morph. And then the last thing we saw is something very fascinating about the 23rd of Sivan, that's next week, plays a very auspicious role on the Jewish calendar. Why don't we mark it with celebration? So one suggestion that's out there from Rabbi B'Tzalel Cohen of Vilna is because that day is just such a day that'll live in infamy, we can't. I would just say something about this is, think about what's the day that always lives in infamy is December 7th. December 7th, right? That's Pearl Harbor Day. So it's like something great could happen on December 7th. Layla and I got married on December 7th. But at the end of the day, and then we'll always celebrate it as our anniversary. But to anybody who experienced Pearl Harbor, it's always going to be eclipsed. That's Pearl Harbor Day. They're happy for us that that's our wedding anniversary, but we can't, so to say, claim December 7th. It's not a clean date that we could just be reserved for us. So it sounds like that's what he's saying here. There was something so calamitous that happened to Bnei Yisrael on that 23rd of Sivan. That's why we chose not to celebrate it. It's a theory. Again, maybe there's other answers, but that's a theory that's out there. Gives us something to think about as the 23rd of Sivan approaches this coming Monday. All right. I want to thank you all for joining. I'm going to